The black Escalade pulled into the circular driveway just as the California sun began its descent behind the hills of Hillsborough. Marcus Thornton stepped out onto the heated cobblestones, his Italian leather shoes making a soft click against the stone. 8 weeks, 56 days, 1,344 hours spent in New York boardrooms, negotiating what his lawyers called the deal of the decade. $60 million hung in the balance, and Marcus had closed it. He should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt only exhaustion and a gnawing hunger to hold his little girl. The mansion stood before him like something from a magazine spread, 6,000 square feet of modern architecture, all glass and steel and imported marble. The kind of house that made strangers stop their cars just to stare. Marcus barely saw it anymore. To him, this place had only ever been about one thing: the sound of tiny feet running across those marble floors, the echo of a 3-year-old's laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. The way Sophie's voice would ring out the moment his car appeared, that pure joy of Daddy's home that made every business trip feel worth enduring. But as he pushed open the heavy front door, Marcus heard something that stopped him cold. Nothing. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something darker. A silence that had weight and texture. A silence that felt wrong the way a missing heartbeat feels wrong. Marcus Thornton had heard silence before. He had sat in boardrooms where millions of dollars hung on a single decision, where grown men held their breath waiting for him to speak. He knew the silence of power, of anticipation, of calculated strategy. This was different. This silence screamed. He set his briefcase down slowly, the leather case making a dull thud against the floor. "Sophie?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, scratched raw from too many late-night conference calls. "Baby girl, Daddy's home." The words traveled through the foyer, past the crystal chandelier that cost more than most people's cars, down the hallway lined with abstract art that Victoria had insisted made them look cultured. They traveled, and they died in the emptiness. No response. No thunder of small feet racing toward him. No squeal of excitement. No Sophie. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He took 3 steps forward and stopped again. Something in the air itself felt different. Beneath the usual scent of expensive candles and fresh flowers, there was something else. Something metallic and sharp. Something that reminded him of hospitals, of cleaning products used to scrub away evidence of things that should not have happened. "Rosa!" he called out, looking toward the kitchen where the housekeeper usually prepared dinner at this hour. "Rosa, where's Sophie?" A figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. Rosa Mendez, 52 years old, small and sturdy. The woman who had been with them since before Sophie was born. The woman who had helped Marcus change his first diaper when his hands shook so badly he could barely fasten the tabs. She stood there now, and Marcus saw something in her face that made his stomach drop. Her eyes would not meet his. They darted left, then right, then down to the floor. Her hands twisted together in front of her apron, ringing and ringing like she was trying to squeeze water from stone. "Mr. Thornton," her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You are home early." Early. He had told Victoria he would arrive at 6. It was 5:45. 15 minutes early, and Rosa looked at him like he had caught her hiding a body. "Where's my daughter?" The words came out harder than he meant them. Rosa flinched, and Marcus felt a spike of guilt followed immediately by a wave of alarm. Rosa did not flinch. In 3 years, he had never seen her flinch, not when Sophie had thrown up on her favorite blouse. Not when the espresso machine had exploded and covered half the kitchen in coffee grounds. Rosa was unshakable, until now. "She is..." Rosa's gaze flickered toward the interior of the house, then back to the floor. "Mrs. Victoria is with her. They are fine. Everything is fine." The word fine landed between them like a stone in still water, sending out ripples of untruth. Nothing about the way Rosa said it was fine. Nothing about the way her hands trembled was fine. Nothing about the fact that his daughter had not come running to greet him was fine. Marcus heard footsteps behind him and turned. James, the gardener, was walking past the hallway entrance carrying pruning shears. The man had worked here for 2 years. Every single day, James greeted Marcus with a cheerful, "Good afternoon, Mr. Thornton," and an update on the roses or the hedge maze or whatever botanical project he was nursing along. Today, James's eyes fixed on his shoelaces like they were the most fascinating thing in the world. He hurried past without a word, practically running to get outside. A cold sensation spread through Marcus's chest. He turned in a slow circle, taking in details he had been too tired to notice when he first walked in. The toy corner near the stairs, the spot where Sophie's collection of stuffed animals usually spilled out in a chaotic pile of fuzzy chaos. Empty. The small bookshelf where her picture books stood in their bright rainbow of colors. Half empty. The playmat with its alphabet letters that she loved to rearrange into nonsense words. Gone. On the hall table, pushed into the corner like someone had tried to hide it, Marcus saw something that made his breath catch. Sophie's favorite toy. The purple dinosaur she had named Rex, the one she slept with every single night, the one she cried for if it was not within arm's reach at bedtime. It lay on its side, and one of its fabric arms hung by a thread. The seam had been ripped, stuffing peeking out like exposed bone. Marcus picked it up with hands that had started to shake. Sophie would never have done this. She loved Rex more than anything, more than ice cream, more than cartoons, more than the new dollhouse he had bought her before leaving for New York. The idea that she would tear it, that she would leave it abandoned on a table made no sense, unless she had not been the one to do it. He felt something brush against his leg and looked down. Baxter, their Bernese mountain dog, pressed his massive body against Marcus's thigh. The dog's tail, usually wagging hard enough to knock over furniture, hung low between his legs. His ears lay flat against his skull. When Marcus reached down to pet him, Baxter whimpered and pulled back, limping slightly on his front left paw. "What happened to you, boy?" Marcus knelt, running his hands over the dog's leg. Baxter flinched when he touched a spot near the shoulder. Not a visible injury, but tender enough to make the 100-pound animal pull away in pain. Someone had hurt him. Recently. Marcus stood up, his mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. The house felt like it was closing in around him. The expensive artwork on the walls seemed to lean inward. The chandelier overhead appeared to hang lower, casting shadows that reached for him with fingers of cut crystal light. He needed to find Sophie. Now. Marcus moved deeper into the house, his footsteps muffled by the plush carpet Victoria had imported from Turkey. He passed the formal living room with its uncomfortable white sofas that Sophie was forbidden to sit on. He passed his study with its door closed tight, his laptop and files waiting inside like patient servants. He passed the dining room where the table could seat 12 but had only ever seated 3. The silence followed him like a living thing. It wrapped around him, pressed against his eardrums, made him aware of his own heartbeat thudding in his chest. He wanted to run. He wanted to sprint through every room screaming his daughter's name until she appeared, but something kept his pace measured and careful. An instinct he could not name, a sense that running, shouting, making noise would somehow make things worse. He found her in the main living room. Sophie stood facing the corner where 2 walls met, her tiny body so still she could have been carved from marble. Her shoulders, barely wider than Marcus's handspan, trembled with a rhythm that suggested she had been standing there a long time. She wore her pink overalls, the ones with the rainbow heart on the pocket that she had begged Victoria to buy at Target. Her feet were bare, small toes curled against the hardwood floor. Her arms wrapped around her head in a posture that made Marcus think of tornado drills, of children taught to protect themselves from disaster. "Sweetheart." The word came out soft, barely more than a breath, but Sophie's entire body jerked like he had shouted. Her trembling intensified. She did not turn around. She did not lower her arms. She pressed her forehead harder against the wall, and Marcus heard a sound that drove straight into his heart like a nail. A whimper. Small and scared and so utterly broken that for a moment he forgot how to breathe. He took a step forward, His shoe made the softest whisper of sound against the floor. Sophie flinched so violently that she stumbled, catching herself against the wall with both hands. Still, she did not turn around. "Baby, it's Daddy." Marcus kept his voice gentle, the same tone he had used when she was an infant and startled at loud noises. "It's okay. You can turn around now." But she did not turn around. She stood frozen in her corner, breathing in quick, shallow gasps that shook her small frame. Marcus realized with a horror that made his knees weak that she was not being stubborn. She was not playing a game. She was terrified of him, of the sound of footsteps, of the possibility of turning around. This was not shyness. This was not a tantrum. This was a child who had been taught that the wall was the only safe place. This was a child who had learned that turning around meant pain. Marcus felt his vision blur at the edges. The expensive living room with its designer furniture and its view of the manicured gardens seemed to tilt and spin. He reached out a hand to steady himself against the leather armchair, his fingers digging into the soft material. 3 years ago, his wife Elena had died giving birth to this little girl. 3 years ago, Marcus had stood in a hospital corridor holding an infant car seat and listening to doctors tell him there was nothing more they could do. 3 years ago, he had made a promise, standing in that sterile hallway with his newborn daughter sleeping in her carrier. He had whispered words that he thought would guide the rest of his life. "I promise," he had said to Elena's memory, to Sophie's future, to whatever God might be listening. "I promise I will protect her, always." And now, standing in his own living room, looking at his 3-year-old daughter shaking in a corner too terrified to turn around, Marcus understood with perfect clarity that he had broken that promise. He had left her. He had chosen a $60 million deal over her safety. He had trusted the wrong person. And whatever had happened in these walls during the 8 weeks he was gone, whatever had transformed his laughing, dancing, joy-filled little girl into this trembling statue, it was his fault. He wanted to grab her, to scoop her up and hold her and tell her it would never happen again. But he could not, because right now, in this moment, he was part of what scared her. The sound of adult footsteps, the presence of someone bigger and stronger. He was, through no intent of his own, a threat. So Marcus did the only thing he could do. He lowered himself to the floor, sitting cross-legged on the hardwood about 6 feet away from where Sophie stood. He made himself small, unthreatening, patient, and he started to talk. "Do you remember the story I used to tell you before bed?" His voice came out rough, thick with emotions he could not name. "About the princess and the dragon? You always wanted the princess to have a purple dragon instead of a knight in armor. You said dragons were better than horses." Sophie's trembling slowed just a fraction. Not much, but enough that Marcus saw it, enough to give him hope. "I missed you so much, Pumpkin. Every single day in New York I thought about coming home to you. I bought you a present. It's a new book about dinosaurs. I thought maybe we could read it together tonight." A tiny sound emerged from where Sophie stood. Not quite a word, but close. Marcus leaned forward slightly, straining to hear. "You remember Rex?" he continued, keeping his voice low and steady. "I saw him in the hall. He looks like he got hurt. Maybe tomorrow we can take him to the toy doctor. Get him fixed up good as new. What do you think?" For the first time since Marcus had entered the room, Sophie's hands lowered slightly from her head. Her shoulders remained rigid, but the smallest crack had appeared in whatever wall of fear surrounded her. "Can you look at Daddy, sweetheart? Just for a second?" The silence stretched so long that Marcus thought she would not respond, but then, moving with the caution of someone approaching a wild animal, Sophie began to turn. Inch by inch, she rotated her small body. And when Marcus finally saw her face, something inside him shattered into pieces so small he knew he would never get them all back together again. Her eyes were red and swollen, the lids puffy from crying. Her cheeks showed the tracks of dried tears running from her eyes down to her chin in pale trails through the dirt on her face, dirt His daughter's face was dirty, like she had not been bathed in days. Her hair, usually brushed into soft curls, hung in tangles around her face, but it was her eyes that destroyed him. Those beautiful hazel eyes that used to sparkle when she saw him, that used to light up her whole face when she smiled. Now they looked at him with something Marcus had never wanted to see in his daughter's gaze. Fear, and worse than fear, a kind of dull acceptance. The look of someone who has learned that hoping for rescue only makes the disappointment hurt more. "Daddy?" The word came out as a question, like she was not sure he was real, like maybe he was another dream that would disappear if she blinked. "Yes, baby. It's me. I'm really here." Sophie took one hesitant step toward him, then stopped. Her small fingers twisted together in front of her chest, ringing and ringing the same way Rosa's had. "You came back." The statement hit Marcus like a physical blow, as if his return had been in doubt, as if someone had told her he might not come back at all. "Of course I came back. I always come back. I will always come back to you." But even as he said it, Marcus knew the words rang hollow, because he had not come back, not when it mattered. He had stayed in New York for 8 weeks while something terrible happened here, while someone hurt his little girl, while her world fell apart and he was 3,000 miles away talking about market projections and stock options. Sophie took another step, then another, moving with the careful placement of feet that suggested she was used to walking quietly, used to trying not to be noticed. When she reached him, she did not throw herself into his arms the way she used to. She stood just within reach, close enough to touch but not touching, waiting for permission. "Can I give you a hug?" Marcus asked, forcing the words past the boulder lodged in his throat. Sophie nodded once, quick and nervous. The moment his arms went around her, she collapsed against him like a puppet with cut strings. Her small body shook with sobs that came from somewhere deep inside, wrenching cries that sounded like they had been held back for too long. Marcus held her and rocked her and felt wetness on his own cheeks that he made no effort to wipe away. She smelled wrong. His daughter, who had always smelled like baby shampoo and strawberry toothpaste, and that indefinable sweet scent that belonged only to children, now smelled like fear and unwashed hair and something else. Something chemical and harsh that made Marcus think of cleaning products, of evidence being scrubbed away. He felt something around her neck and reached to check what it was, a thin chain that he did not recognize. No, wait, he did recognize it. The gold was familiar, the weight of it settling into his palm with the memory of 1,000 other times he had held it. Elena's locket, the one Marcus had worn on a chain around his own neck since the day she died. The one he touched every morning when he woke up, every night before he slept, every time he needed to remember his promise. The one he had locked in his safe in the study before leaving for New York because he could not bear to risk losing it. Someone had taken it out. Someone had put it around Sophie's neck, and from the way she clutched at it now, fingers wrapped so tight around the gold that her knuckles turned white, Marcus knew that locket had become important to her, had become protection, had become the only piece of her mother she had left to hold on to. "Who gave you Mommy's necklace, baby?" Sophie's crying hitched. She pulled back just far enough to look up at him, and in her eyes Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Guilt. A 3-year-old child should not know guilt, should not know how to look ashamed, but Sophie looked at him with the expression of someone who had done something wrong and was waiting for punishment. "I took it," she whispered, her voice so small Marcus had to lean closer to hear. "From Daddy's special drawer. I'm sorry. I needed Mommy." The words "I needed Mommy" broke something fundamental in Marcus's understanding of the world. This child, who had never known her mother, who had only ever seen her in photographs, needed her so badly that she had stolen into Marcus's study and taken the one thing he treasured above all else. Not to play with, not to break, but to hold on to feel close to someone who might protect her when no one else would. "You can keep it," Marcus managed to say through a throat that felt like it was closing. "It's yours now. Mommy would want you to have it." Sophie's fingers relaxed slightly on the locket, but she did not let go. She laid her head against Marcus's shoulder, and he felt her heartbeat gradually slow from its panicked rhythm to something closer to normal. They sat like that for a long time, father and daughter on the floor of a living room that cost more than most people earned in 5 years, surrounded by silence that still felt wrong but now carried a different weight. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of two people too broken to speak. It was Sophie who broke it, her voice thin and wavering, asking a question that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. "Daddy, are you going to go away again?" The question held universes of pain. It held 8 weeks of abandonment. It held nights of crying with no one to comfort her. It held days of fear with no one to protect her. It held the knowledge that the person she loved most in the world had left her alone with someone who hurt her. "No, baby." Marcus pulled her closer, his arms forming a cage around her small body. A cage that should have existed all along. A cage that should have kept her safe from the very beginning. "No, I'm not going away, not ever again, I promise you, Sophie. Daddy is never leaving you again." He felt her relax against him, felt the last of the rigidity leave her small frame. She believed him. Even after everything, even after he had already broken his promises once, she believed him. That trust was a weight Marcus knew he would carry for the rest of his life. He would earn it back. However long it took, whatever he had to do, he would prove to this little girl that she could depend on him. But first, he needed to find out what had happened. He needed to know who had hurt her, and he needed to make sure it never ever happened again. "Sweetheart," he said carefully, stroking her tangled hair, "can you tell Daddy why you were standing in the corner?" Sophie's body went rigid again. Her breathing picked up speed. Marcus felt her small hands clutch at his shirt, gripping the fabric like it was the only thing keeping her from falling into an abyss. "It's okay," he said quickly. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. It's okay." But Sophie shook her head against his chest. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone much older, someone who had learned lessons no child should ever learn. "Mommy Vicky said I have to face the wall when I'm bad. She said if I turn around it will hurt more." The words landed in the quiet room like grenades. Mommy Vicky, Victoria, his wife, the woman he had married 2 years ago because he thought Sophie needed a mother figure. The woman who had seemed so perfect, so caring, so ready to love his daughter as her own. The woman he had trusted with the most precious thing in his world. That woman had made his daughter stand facing a wall, had threatened her with pain if she turned around, had taught a 3-year-old that obedience meant terror and punishment meant agony. Marcus looked down at Sophie's small arms, the ones that had been wrapped around her head when he found her. He gently took her left arm and pushed up the sleeve of her pink overalls. The bruise stood out against her pale skin like a brand. Purple and blue and yellow at the edges, the perfect impression of adult fingers wrapped around a child's bicep. Someone had grabbed her. Hard enough to leave marks, hard enough to make her cry out in pain, hard enough that the bruise had not faded even days later. "Who did this, Sophie?" But he already knew, even before Sophie's eyes filled with fresh tears. Even before she whispered the name that Marcus had been dreading to hear. "Mommy Vicky. She said I was bad. She said I made too much noise." The rage that filled Marcus in that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not the sharp anger of a business deal gone wrong or the frustration of a delayed flight. This was something primal and ancient, rising from a place deep in his DNA that had existed since the first father had watched over the first child. This was the fury of a protector who had failed in his one sacred duty. This was the wrath of someone who had finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. But beneath the rage, colder and more dangerous, ran a river of guilt so deep that Marcus thought he might drown in it. He had done this. He had brought Victoria into their lives. He had married her. He had left Sophie alone with her. He had ignored the warning signs, had told himself that Victoria was just strict, just old-fashioned in her discipline, just stressed from taking care of a toddler alone. He had explained away every red flag because it was easier than confronting the truth. And while he had been explaining and excusing and choosing to be blind, His daughter had suffered. The sound of heels clicking against marble pulled Marcus from his thoughts. He looked up to see Victoria standing in the doorway of the living room, perfectly composed in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Rosa made in a month. Her makeup was flawless. Her hair fell in artfully arranged waves around her shoulders. She looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine spread on Elegant Living. "Oh, you're home early," she said, her voice carrying that bright, cheerful tone that Marcus had once found charming. "You should have told me. I would have had Rosa prepare dinner." She stepped into the room, her heels clicking with each stride, and Marcus watched Sophie's reaction with growing horror. His daughter, who moments ago had been relaxing in his arms, went completely still. Not the stillness of comfort, but the stillness of prey that has spotted a predator. Every muscle in her small body tensed. Her breathing became shallow and quick. Her fingers dug into Marcus's shirt with desperate strength. Victoria's gaze swept over the scene before her. Marcus sitting on the floor, Sophie in his arms, the bruise on Sophie's arm clearly visible even from across the room. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Not guilt, not shame, but calculation. The look of someone rapidly assessing a situation and formulating a response. Then her expression smoothed into concern. "Is everything all right? Did Sophie hurt herself?" The casual lie, delivered with such practiced ease, made Marcus understand something crucial. This was not the first time Victoria had done this. The hiding, the lying, the performance of innocence. She had refined it, perfected it, turned it into an art form. He stood slowly, keeping Sophie in his arms, feeling her bury her face against his shoulder as if trying to disappear. When he spoke, his voice came out calm and measured, but underneath ran currents of steel. "Why was my daughter standing facing the wall?" Victoria blinked, tilting her head in a gesture of confused innocence that Marcus now recognized as theater. "Was she? I had no idea. You know how children are. They play the strangest games." This wasn't a game. Something shifted in the air between them. Victoria's smile tightened at the edges. Her shoulders squared just slightly in a posture of defense. "Marcus, you've been gone for 8 weeks. You don't know what it's been like trying to manage a 3-year-old alone. She's been having tantrums. Terrible twos, except she's 3 now. The pediatrician said it's perfectly normal." "What pediatrician?" The question hung there. Victoria's smile did not waver, but Marcus saw her pupils dilate just a fraction. "Dr. Morrison, you remember." Marcus did remember Dr. Morrison. He also remembered that their last appointment had been 4 months ago, well before he had left for New York. There was no way the doctor had seen Sophie recently. Victoria was lying, smoothly, confidently, with the ease of someone who had lied many times before. "I want to see the receipt from that visit." "Receipt? Marcus, honestly, I don't keep every little piece of paper." "What's gotten into you?" "What's gotten into me," Marcus said, his voice dropping lower, "is that my daughter has a handprint bruise on her arm. Care to explain that?" Victoria's eyes flickered towards Sophie, then back to Marcus. "She fell. I told her not to climb on the bookshelf, but you know how stubborn she is. She gets that from you." The lie was so brazen, so utterly without shame, that Marcus felt something break loose inside him. All the years of trying to be diplomatic, of avoiding confrontation, of keeping peace at all costs, gone, burned away in the face of this woman's casual cruelty. "She didn't fall." "How would you know? You weren't here." Victoria's tone shifted, taking on an edge of irritation. "You were in New York, living in hotels, eating fancy dinners, while I was here dealing with her crying and her tantrums and her constant demands. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is?" The words revealed more than Victoria probably intended. The resentment, the anger, the view of Sophie as a burden rather than a child. Marcus held his daughter closer, feeling her trembling return. "You're right," he said quietly. "I wasn't here. That's something I'm going to regret for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and things are going to change." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before Marcus could answer, Rosa appeared in the doorway, her face pale and her hands still twisting together. "Mr. Thornton, there is something I need to tell you." Victoria spun toward the housekeeper, and Marcus saw naked fury flash across her face before she could hide it. "Rosa, this is a private conversation. Go back to the kitchen." But Rosa did not move. She stood in the doorway, trembling like a leaf in a storm, but standing nonetheless. Her eyes met Marcus's, and in them he saw desperation and fear and something else. Determination. "Mr. Thornton," she said again, her voice stronger this time. "Please, there is something you need to see." Marcus stood frozen in the living room, Sophie clinging to him like a lifeline, Victoria's fury barely concealed behind her perfect makeup, and Rosa trembling in the doorway with words that clearly terrified her to speak. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked in the silence, each second stretching into eternity. Outside, the California sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked too beautiful for a moment this dark. "Rosa!" Victoria's voice came out sharp as broken glass. "I said go back to the kitchen." But the housekeeper did not move. 52 years old, 4 feet 11 inches tall, undocumented and vulnerable in ways that Victoria had clearly exploited, Rosa Mendez planted her feet on the expensive Turkish carpet and looked Marcus directly in the eyes. "Mr. Thornton, I have been working for you for 3 years, since before Miss Sophie was born. I helped you when your hands shook too much to fasten a diaper. I sat with you when you cried in the kitchen at 3 in the morning because you did not know how to make a baby stop crying. I was there." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she pushed forward, each syllable costing her something. "And I need you to know that I tried to call you 4 times in the last 6 weeks. But Mrs. Victoria, she said the signal in New York was bad. She said you were too busy with important meetings. She said it would only distract you from your work." Marcus felt ice spreading through his veins. He looked at his phone, pulled up the call log, scrolled back through weeks of conference calls and business contacts. Nothing from Rosa, not a single missed call. He looked up at Victoria, saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Rosa's number must have gotten blocked somehow," Victoria said smoothly. "You know how these phones are, always glitching." "I did not block myself, Mrs. Victoria." Rosa's voice grew stronger, fed by some reserve of courage Marcus had not known she possessed. "You took Mr. Thornton's phone one night when he was here last time. You said you wanted to add a recipe app, but I saw you. I saw you block my number. I saw you block the nanny's number. I saw you block anyone who might tell him the truth." Victoria's mask slipped further. "That's a lie. She's lying, Marcus. You're not actually going to believe the help over your own wife, are you?" The casual cruelty of the phrase "the help" told Marcus everything he needed to know about how Victoria truly saw people. Not as human beings, but as tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. "What do you need to show me, Rosa?" The housekeeper's shoulders sagged with relief. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a USB drive, the cheap plastic kind you could buy at any drugstore for $5. Her hand shook as she extended it toward Marcus, but her eyes remained steady. "I need to show you what happens when you are not here." Victoria moved fast, faster than Marcus would have thought possible in those heels. She crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed for the USB drive, but Rosa pulled it back and pressed it into Marcus's free hand, the one not holding Sophie. The moment it touched his palm, Victoria's composure shattered completely. "Don't you dare," she hissed, all pretense of civility gone. "That's my private property. You have no right." "Your property?" Marcus closed his fist around the drive. "Interesting choice of words. What exactly is on here that you don't want me to see?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed twice before she found words. "It's nothing. It's just Rosa being paranoid and overstepping her boundaries. I've been meaning to fire her for weeks, and now I see I should have done it sooner." "Fire me," Rosa said quietly. "Call immigration. Do whatever you want to me. But Mr. Thornton needs to see what you did to that little girl." Sophie whimpered against Marcus's shoulder, and he felt wetness seeping through his shirt. His daughter was crying silently. The kind of crying children learn when making noise brings punishment. The kind of crying that breaks something fundamental in the world. "Take Sophie upstairs," Marcus said to Rosa. "Put her in her room. Lock the door from the inside. Don't come out until I come get you." Victoria laughed, a brittle sound with razor edges. "You're being ridiculous. This is all a misunderstanding that we can clear up if you would just calm down and listen to reason." But Marcus was already moving, carrying Sophie toward Rosa. His daughter's arms tightened around his neck, and he had to gently pry her fingers loose. "Baby, I need you to go with Rosa for a little while. Just a little while. I promise I'll come get you soon." "Don't leave me," Sophie whispered, and the naked terror in her voice nearly broke his resolve. But he had to do this. He had to see what was on that drive, and he could not have Sophie in the room when he did. Rosa took Sophie gently, and the little girl transferred her desperate grip to the housekeeper's neck. As Rosa carried her toward the stairs, Marcus heard Sophie's small voice asking a question that drove nails into his heart. "Is Daddy going away again?" "No, mija," Rosa answered, her own voice thick with emotion. "Your daddy is staying right here. He is going to make everything better now." The sound of their footsteps faded up the stairs. A door closed, a lock clicked, and Marcus turned to face his wife in the living room that had become a battlefield. Victoria stood with her arms crossed, her perfect posture radiating indignation. "I cannot believe you're doing this. After everything I've sacrificed, everything I've given up to take care of your daughter while you chase your precious business deals, this is the thanks I get, being accused and humiliated by the hired help?" Marcus walked past her without a word. He went to his study, to the heavy oak desk that had belonged to his grandfather, to the laptop that connected him to a world of information and evidence and truth. He heard Victoria's heels clicking behind him, following him, her voice rising with each step. "You're being manipulated, Marcus. Can't you see that? Rosa has always been jealous of me. She thinks she knows what's best for Sophie, but she's just a housekeeper. She doesn't have children of her own. She doesn't understand discipline." Marcus plugged the USB drive into his laptop and waited for it to load. The screen flickered to life, showing a folder labeled "Please Help Sophie." The date stamps went back 6 weeks. Dozens of video files, each one named with a date and time. His hand hovered over the mouse, hesitating for just a moment before he clicked on the earliest file. The video opened on a grainy image of the kitchen, shot from a high angle near the ceiling. Marcus recognized the view immediately. It was positioned above the pantry door, looking down at the center island and the surrounding floor. In the frame, small and alone, stood Sophie. She wore her purple pajamas, the ones with the stars that she had picked out herself. She was holding something in her hand, a plastic cup. She was trying to pour herself water from the pitcher that Rosa always left on the counter. Then Victoria entered the frame, and Marcus felt his stomach turn to lead. She moved with purpose, with anger already built up and looking for a target. She grabbed the cup from Sophie's hand so hard that water sloshed over the rim and onto the floor. Sophie jumped back, startled, her small face crumpling toward tears. "What did I tell you about making messes?" Victoria's voice came through tinny on the laptop speakers, but the venom in it was crystal clear. "What did I tell you?" "I'm sorry, Mommy Vicky," Sophie's small voice answered. "I was thirsty." "I don't care if you're dying of thirst. You don't touch anything in this kitchen without asking me first, do you understand?" Sophie nodded, backing up until she hit the island counter. Marcus watched his daughter shrink, trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear. "I said, do you understand?" Victoria's voice rose to a shout that made Marcus flinch even through the recording. "Yes, Mommy Vicky." "Yes, what?" "Yes, I understand." Victoria reached past Sophie, and Marcus saw her hand close around the handle of the cast-iron skillet hanging on the wall. His entire body went cold. He wanted to look away, wanted to close the laptop, wanted to unsee what he knew was coming. But he forced himself to keep watching. Sophie deserved that much. She deserved a witness to what she had endured. Victoria lifted the pan and slammed it down on the counter next to Sophie's head. The impact made a sound like a gunshot. Sophie screamed and dropped to the floor, her hands covering her head, her small body curling into a ball of pure terror. And Victoria stood over her, holding the pan, breathing hard, and Marcus could see satisfaction in her posture. Satisfaction at having inspired such fear. Satisfaction at having such complete power over something so small and helpless. "Get up," Victoria said. "Stop being dramatic. I didn't even touch you." But Sophie could not stop shaking. She stayed curled on the floor, whimpering until Victoria grabbed her arm and yanked her to her feet. The grip was hard enough that Marcus could see Sophie's skin compress under the pressure. Hard enough to leave the bruise he had seen earlier. Hard enough to hurt. "Face the wall," Victoria commanded. "You're going to stand there until I say you can move, and if I see you turn around, the next time the pan won't miss." The video showed Sophie walking to the wall on trembling legs. It showed her standing with her arms wrapped around her head. It showed Victoria watching her for a long moment before walking out of frame. And it showed Sophie standing there, alone and terrified, for the next 43 minutes until the video file ended. Marcus sat in his chair, hands gripping the armrests so hard he thought the wood might crack. Beside him, Victoria had gone very quiet. When he looked up at her, he saw that her face had gone pale beneath the makeup. "It's not what it looks like," she started, but the words died in her throat when she saw his expression. "What does it look like, Victoria? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like child abuse. It looks like torture. It looks like you systematically terrorizing a 3-year-old child while I was 3,000 miles away trusting you to take care of her. She needed discipline. You don't know what she's like when you're not here. The tantrums, the crying, the constant demands. Someone had to teach her how to behave." Marcus clicked on the next video file. This one showed the dining room. Sophie stood facing the corner while Victoria sat at the table, calmly eating lunch and scrolling through her phone. 26 minutes of a child forced to stand in silence, while the adult who was supposed to care for her treated her punishment as background noise. Another file. Sophie trying to play with her toys in the living room, moving them as quietly as possible, freezing in fear every time she made the slightest sound. Victoria appearing in the doorway, snatching the toys away, telling her that little girls who can't play quietly don't deserve toys at all. Another file. Sophie asking for help reaching a book on a high shelf. Victoria telling her that if she can't do it herself, she's too stupid to read anyway. Sophie's small face crumpling, trying not to cry because crying made things worse. File after file after file. A catalog of cruelty. A documentary of abuse. 8 weeks of terror compressed into dozens of video clips, each one more damning than the last. And then Marcus opened a file from 3 weeks ago and everything got worse. The video showed the kitchen again. But this time Victoria was not alone. A man stood near the island, his back to the camera. But Marcus recognized him immediately from the build, the expensive suit, the way he carried himself. Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries. Marcus's biggest competitor, the man who had been trying to buy out Tech Guard Solutions for the past 5 years, and had been rejected every single time. What was Richard Blackwood doing in Marcus's kitchen? "Handle the kid, Victoria," Richard's voice came through the speakers, and Marcus felt reality tilt sideways. "We need silence when we talk numbers. The last time we met here, she came downstairs crying, and I almost had to cut our meeting short." Victoria's voice responded from off camera. "I told you, she's 3. She cries. That's what they do. Then make her stop. We're too close to the finish line to risk Thornton getting suspicious. If he finds out we've been meeting, if he realizes what we're planning, the whole thing falls apart." Marcus's hands began to shake. He clicked pause, rewind, played it again. Richard Blackwood in his house, talking about planning something, talking about keeping it secret from Marcus. His mind raced through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. "Marcus, I can explain," Victoria said, but her voice carried no conviction. She knew there was no explanation that would make this right. He clicked play again, watched as Richard moved closer to the camera, revealing more of his profile. Watched as Victoria appeared in frame, her body language completely different than it was with Marcus. Harder, more calculating, the performance of the loving stepmother stripped away to reveal something cold underneath. How much longer do I have to keep this up? Victoria asked. Playing house, pretending to care about his brat, smiling and nodding while he talks about his boring business deals? Richard checked his watch. Another month, maybe 2. He's close to signing the merger papers. Once he does, I'll have controlling interest. We can push him out, take the company public, cash out for 10 times what it's worth now. And the prenup? Your lawyer found the loophole. If you can prove he's an absent father, neglectful, too focused on work to properly care for his child, you'll get full custody and 50% of assets in the divorce. Combined with your share from the company's sale, you're looking at 15 million minimum. The numbers swirled in Marcus's head, but they meant nothing compared to the cold reality of betrayal. Victoria had married him for money. She had agreed to be Sophie's stepmother as part of a con, and Richard Blackwood, the man Marcus had competed against for years, had been inside his home, plotting his destruction. What about the kid? Victoria's voice on the recording asked. What happens to her after? Richard shrugged. Not your problem. Ship her off to boarding school. Thornton can have her on holidays if he wants. You'll be too rich to care. The video continued, showing them discussing details of the merger, the specific clauses they had manipulated, the board members they had bought off or blackmailed. Marcus watched it all with a growing sense of disbelief. How had he missed this? How had he been so blind? Because he had wanted to believe. Because after Elena died, he had been drowning in grief and responsibility, and Victoria had seemed like a lifeline. Beautiful, charming, interested in him and willing to love his daughter. He had overlooked the small inconsistencies, the moments when her mask slipped, the times when her story did not quite add up. He had chosen to be blind because being blind was easier than being alone, and Sophie had paid the price for his willful ignorance. He clicked on another file. This one dated just 5 days ago. The dining room again, but this time Sophie was in frame. She stood in the doorway, clearly not supposed to be there, her eyes wide as she watched Victoria and Richard sitting at the table with papers spread between them. She could not have understood what they were discussing, but she knew she was witnessing something secret, something forbidden. Victoria's chair scraped as she stood suddenly, having spotted Sophie. What did I tell you about spying? Sophie tried to run, but Victoria was faster. She grabbed the little girl's arm and dragged her into the dining room, her grip brutal enough that Sophie cried out in pain. Richard watched from his chair, his expression one of irritation rather than concern. "Get rid of her," he said. "She's becoming a problem." "I'm handling it," Victoria snapped, shaking Sophie hard enough to make her head snap back. "If you ruin this deal, if you make one more sound, you'll be sorry. Do you understand me?" Sophie nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. "I don't think you do," Victoria continued, her voice dropping to something low and menacing. "You heard us talking last week too, didn't you? You remember things you might tell your daddy." "I won't tell," Sophie sobbed. "I promise I won't tell." "Your daddy won't believe you anyway," Victoria said, and Marcus heard his own failure echoed in those words. "He never does. He thinks you're just a silly little girl who makes up stories." On the recording, Richard stood and moved closer to where Victoria held Sophie. His voice, when he spoke, carried the casual cruelty of someone discussing an inconvenience rather than a child. "Make sure she doesn't talk. I don't care how you do it. Scare her, threaten her, lock her in a closet if you have to. But we're too close to the end to let a 3-year-old ruin everything." Victoria nodded, and Marcus watched his wife, the woman he had trusted with his daughter's life, drag Sophie out of frame while the little girl screamed for her daddy. The daddy who was not there, the daddy who would not come, the daddy who had chosen a business deal over his child's safety. The video ended. The screen went black. Marcus sat in the silence of his study, the USB drive still plugged into his laptop, containing dozens more files he could not bring himself to watch. Not yet. Not when his hands were shaking this badly and his vision kept blurring with rage and grief and guilt. He turned to look at Victoria. She stood near the door and all the fight had gone out of her. Her shoulders sagged. Her perfect makeup could not hide the fear in her eyes. She had been caught, completely and irrefutably, and she knew it. "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice coming out rough and raw. How long have you been working with Richard? Victoria's laugh was bitter. Since before we met, he approached me at that charity gala, told me there was money in it if I could get close to you. I didn't know I'd have to actually marry you. That wasn't part of the original plan. But then you proposed and Richard said it was perfect, so I said yes. The casual way she said it, like she was describing a business transaction rather than the foundation of their marriage, made Marcus feel sick. And Sophie? Was hurting her part of the plan too? I didn't mean to, Victoria said, and for the first time she sounded almost human, almost regretful. At first I was just going to be strict, you know, the disciplinarian stepmother. Give you reason to think you needed to be home more, make you feel guilty for traveling. But then she kept crying, and nothing I did would make her stop. And Richard kept pressuring me about the timeline, and She trailed off, seeming to realize that there was no end to that sentence that would make things better. You just took it out on a 3-year-old child who had no way to defend herself. She reminded me of you, Victoria said, and something ugly twisted in her expression. The way you looked at her, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. The way you talked about her when you called from New York. All your love went to her and I got nothing. Do you know what that's like? To be married to someone who will never love you because he's still in love with a ghost? So you tortured my daughter because you were jealous? I didn't torture her. I disciplined her. There's a difference. Marcus stood and Victoria took an involuntary step back. Good. She should be afraid. She should understand that the man she had married, the one who had been patient and accommodating and willing to avoid conflict, was gone. In his place stood a father who had finally, belatedly, catastrophically understood what he needed to do. Get out of my house. Marcus, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through our issues. I'll be better with Sophie. I promise I'll be better. I said get out. His voice rose to something that was almost a shout, and he did not care. Get out before I call the police and have you arrested for child abuse. Victoria's eyes widened. You wouldn't. Think about the scandal. Think about what it would do to your business, to your reputation. People would ask why you didn't notice sooner. They'd question your judgment. I don't care about my reputation. I don't care about my business. I care about my daughter, and you are never going to be alone with her again. Now get out. But Victoria did not move. She stood in the doorway of his study, and he saw her expression shift from fear to calculation. If you try to divorce me, I'll fight you for custody. I have those affidavits from the nannies. I have documentation of all the times you were gone. Any judge will see that I've been the primary caretaker. Any judge will also see the videos Rosa took. Videos that were recorded without my knowledge or consent. Any good lawyer will get those thrown out as inadmissible. And Richard has excellent lawyers. The best money can buy. Marcus felt cold certainty settle over him. This was not over. This was just beginning. Victoria and Richard had been planning this for years, building their case, covering their tracks. They had anticipated resistance. They had prepared for the possibility that Marcus might discover the truth. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They had underestimated how far a father would go to protect his child. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had saved years ago but never thought he would need. David Chen, family attorney, the lawyer who had helped Marcus write his will after Elena died, who had set up Sophie's trust fund, who had once said, "If you ever need anything, anything at all, you call me." The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Marcus, it's almost midnight. What's wrong?" "David, I need emergency custody of my daughter, tonight." There was a pause, then the sound of David sitting up, fully alert. "What happened?" "My wife has been abusing Sophie. I have video evidence. And there's a conspiracy involving Richard Blackwood to steal my company. I need my daughter protected, and I need it now." David's voice turned sharp and focused. "Send me everything, every video, every file, everything you have. I'm calling a judge right now. It's midnight. I don't care what time it is. If a child is in danger, we can get an emergency hearing. Send me those files, Marcus, now." Marcus transferred the files from the USB drive to his email, sent them to David, and listened to the lawyer's sharp intake of breath as he started watching the first video. "Jesus Christ," David whispered. "How long has this been going on?" "8 weeks that I know of, maybe longer." "And you're absolutely certain about the Blackwood connection?" "It's on the recordings, him and Victoria planning the whole thing." "Okay." David's voice took on the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what needed to happen. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay in that house with Sophie. Lock yourselves in a room if you have to. I'm filing for an emergency protective order right now. Give me 2 hours and I'll have police there with a court order removing Victoria from the premises." 2 hours? Marcus thought about Sophie upstairs, thought about Victoria still in the house, thought about how much damage could happen in 2 hours. "I'll make it 90 minutes. Can you keep Sophie safe for 90 minutes? "Yes." "Then do it. And Marcus, don't confront Victoria again. Don't give her any warning that this is coming. We want her surprised and off balance when the police arrive." Marcus ended the call and looked up to find Victoria gone. He heard her footsteps on the stairs heading up toward the bedrooms, toward where Rosa and Sophie were locked in Sophie's room. His heart stopped. He ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, his dress shoes slipping on the polished wood. He reached the second-floor hallway just as Victoria raised her hand to knock on Sophie's door. "Victoria, stop!" She turned, and the expression on her face sent ice through his veins. Gone was the fear, the regret, the calculation. In its place was something desperate and dangerous. "I need to see her. I need to explain. You're not going anywhere near my daughter. She's my daughter too, legally. We're married, Marcus. I have rights. Not for much longer." Victoria's hand dropped to the doorknob, and Marcus saw with horror that she was trying to turn it. But Rosa had locked it from the inside, and the old-fashioned key lock held firm. "Sophie!" Victoria called through the door. "Sophie, honey, open the door! Mommy needs to talk to you." From inside the room came a sound that would haunt Marcus forever. A scream, high and terrified and full of pure animal panic. Sophie, hearing Victoria's voice, screaming like she was being murdered. "You're scaring her," Marcus said, moving to put himself between Victoria and the door. "I'm scaring her? You're the one who's turned her against me. You and that meddling housekeeper. I've taken care of her for 2 years while you were off building your empire. She's mine as much as she's yours." The door opened a crack, and Rosa's face appeared in the gap. Her eyes were red from crying. "Mr. Thornton, you need to hear something. Miss Sophie, she told me something about a man." Marcus felt the world tilt again. "What man?" "She says a man came to the house many times. He talked loud. He said things that scared her. He said if Mommy Victoria didn't stop crying, he would hurt Mommy Victoria and hurt Sophie too." Richard. Sophie had heard Richard threatening them both. A 3-year-old child had witnessed her stepmother being blackmailed and threatened, had absorbed that terror, had understood on some level that the adults around her were in danger and therefore could not protect her. "Let me in," Marcus said to Rosa, "and don't let Victoria anywhere near this room." He slipped through the narrow opening Rosa created, and she locked the door behind him immediately. The room was dark except for Sophie's nightlight, a small lamp shaped like a moon that cast everything in soft silver. Sophie sat on her bed, clutching the stuffed raccoon that she had salvaged from somewhere, her face streaked with tears. "Daddy." Her voice was so small, so broken. Marcus crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. She was trembling, her small body shaking like she was freezing even though the room was warm. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." "The bad man," Sophie whispered against his shoulder. "He said mean things. He made Mommy Vicky cry. Then Mommy Vicky got mad at me." "Did the bad man ever hurt you, Pumpkin?" Sophie shook her head. "He just talked loud, really loud, and Mommy Vicky was scared of him, I could tell. She got scared and then she got mean." The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that made Marcus sick. Richard had been blackmailing Victoria, threatening her, using her fear to manipulate her into hurting Sophie. And Victoria, rather than asking Marcus for help, rather than going to the police, had chosen to take her terror and rage out on the most vulnerable person in the house. Neither of them deserved forgiveness. Both of them would pay. Marcus held his daughter in the silver moonlight of her bedroom and made a new promise. Not to Elena's memory this time, but to Sophie herself, to the living, breathing, terrified child in his arms. "I'm never leaving you again," he said. "Not for business trips, not for meetings, not for anything. From now on, you and I are a team, and nobody is ever going to hurt you again." Sophie pulled back just enough to look at him with those huge hazel eyes. "Promise?" "I promise." And this time, Marcus Thornton meant to keep it. The night stretched long and terrible. Marcus sat in Sophie's room with the door locked, his daughter finally asleep in his arms after hours of crying. Rosa dozed fitfully in the rocking chair near the window, startling awake at every small sound. Outside the door, Marcus could hear Victoria pacing the hallway, back and forth, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown to something inevitable. At 2:30 in the morning, his phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. "Emergency protective order granted. Police en route. ETA 6 a.m. Judge Santos will hear custody petition at 9 a.m. You need to be ready to move fast." Marcus looked down at Sophie's sleeping face, peaceful for the first time since he had come home. Her small hand clutched Elena's locket even in sleep, and he wondered what dreams moved behind her closed eyelids. He hoped they were good dreams, dreams of safety and sunshine in a world where 3-year-old children did not have to fear the adults who were supposed to protect them. The pacing outside stopped. Marcus heard Victoria's voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone on the phone. He could not make out the words, but the tone sent warning bells clanging in his mind. She was calling someone. Richard, probably, telling him that everything was falling apart, planning their next move. David had told him not to confront her again, to wait for the police, but every instinct Marcus possessed screamed at him to get Sophie out now, to pack a bag and run and never look back. The only thing that kept him in place was the knowledge that running would make him look guilty, would give Victoria ammunition in court, would jeopardize his chances of getting full custody. So he waited, watched the clock tick toward dawn, held his daughter and prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore that he was making the right choice. At 5:45, as the first gray light of morning began to filter through the curtains, Marcus heard a car pull into the driveway. Then another, the distinctive rumble of heavy vehicles, multiple engines. He moved to the window carefully, trying not to wake Sophie, and looked down at the circular drive. 3 police cars, 2 unmarked sedans, and officers in uniform moving toward the front door with the calm efficiency of people who had done this many times before. Victoria's voice rose from downstairs, shrill with panic. "What is this? What's happening? You can't just barge into my home." The sound of official voices, steady and implacable. "Mrs. Thornton, we have an emergency protective order issued by Judge Maria Santos. You are ordered to vacate the premises immediately and maintain a distance of no less than 100 yards from Sophie Thornton." "This is insane! Marcus, tell them this is insane!" But Marcus was already moving, gently waking Sophie, whispering reassurances as her eyes fluttered open in confusion. "It's okay, baby. The police are here. They're going to help us." Rosa unlocked the door and Marcus carried Sophie out into the hallway. At the top of the stairs, he could see Victoria surrounded by officers. Her perfect hair was disheveled now, her makeup smeared from crying or rage or both. She looked up and saw him, saw Sophie in his arms, and something desperate flashed across her face. "Sophie, tell them! Tell them Mommy didn't hurt you! Tell them it was all a misunderstanding!" Sophie buried her face against Marcus's shoulder and began to cry. Not the silent crying she had learned over the past 8 weeks, but loud, gulping sobs that shook her whole body, the kind of crying that told everyone in earshot exactly how terrified she was. One of the female officers stepped forward, her expression professional but compassionate. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Detective Lisa Morrison. We'd like to get Sophie examined by a pediatrician and a child psychologist as soon as possible. We have doctors standing by at Children's Hospital." Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He started down the stairs, acutely aware of Victoria's eyes following his every step. As he passed her, she reached out as if to touch Sophie, and 3 officers immediately moved to block her. "Please," Victoria whispered, and for a moment she sounded almost human, almost sorry. "Please let me just tell her I'm sorry. Ma'am, you need to step back. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't mean to hurt her. Marcus, you have to believe me." But Marcus did not look at her, could not look at her, because if he looked at her, he might say something he would regret later in court. Or worse, he might believe her, might fall for the tears and the apologies and let her worm her way back into their lives. And he could not risk that, not when Sophie's safety hung in the balance. He carried his daughter out of the house into the cool California morning and did not look back. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Marcus sat in a small examination room while doctors checked Sophie for injuries, documented every bruise and scratch and bald patch where her hair had been pulled out. A child psychologist named Dr. Sarah Mitchell sat with Sophie for over an hour, playing with toys and dolls, asking gentle questions, building a picture of what the little girl had endured. When Dr. Mitchell emerged from the examination room, her face was grave. "Mr. Thornton, I've been working with traumatized children for 15 years. What your daughter has been through constitutes severe psychological abuse in addition to the physical abuse. She shows classic symptoms of complex PTSD, hypervigilance, dissociation, fear of loud noises, inappropriate guilt responses." Marcus felt each word like a punch. Will she recover? Children are remarkably resilient. With proper therapy, consistent safety, and a stable caregiver who she trusts, yes, she can recover. But it will take time, months, possibly years, and she'll need you to be patient with her, especially when she has setbacks. "I'll do whatever it takes." Dr. Mitchell's expression softened. "I believe you will. And Mr. Thornton, the fact that you got her out when you did, that you believed her, that you took action immediately, that matters. Many children in her situation don't have an advocate willing to fight for them. She's lucky to have you." Lucky. The word felt like ashes in Marcus's mouth. Sophie was not lucky. A lucky child would never have been hurt in the first place. A lucky child would have a father who noticed what was happening before 8 weeks of torture had passed. But he did not argue, just nodded and thanked the doctor and went back to the examination room where Sophie sat on the table, small and vulnerable in a hospital gown, clutching Elena's locket. "Daddy," she said when she saw him, and the relief in her voice broke his heart all over again. "Are we going home now?" "Not yet, Pumpkin. We have to go see a judge. She's a nice lady who wants to make sure you're safe. And after that, yes, we're going home." The courthouse was an imposing building of stone and glass in downtown San Francisco. Marcus had been here before for business litigation, but never like this. Never carrying his daughter through metal detectors while lawyers and social workers bustled around them with files and serious expressions. David Chen met them in the hallway outside Family Court Division 3. He looked like he had not slept, his suit rumpled, his normally perfect hair standing up in places where he had run his hands through it too many times. "Marcus, Sophie." He crouched down to the little girl's eye level. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name is David. I'm your daddy's friend, and I'm going to help make sure you're safe. Okay?" Sophie nodded solemnly, then looked up at Marcus for confirmation that this stranger was trustworthy. The fact that she looked to him for reassurance, that she trusted his judgment even after he had failed her so catastrophically, made Marcus want to weep. "David's a good man," he told her. "You can trust him." The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had expected, more like a conference room than the grand spaces he had seen on television. Judge Maria Santos sat behind the bench, a woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked at the assembled parties with an expression that suggested she had seen every form of human cruelty and been surprised by none of it. "This is an emergency hearing on the matter of Sophie Thornton," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Mr. Chen, you filed for an emergency protective order and sole custody on behalf of your client, Marcus Thornton. Mrs. Thornton is represented by..." She paused, looking at the defense table where Victoria sat alone. "Where is your attorney, Mrs. Thornton?" Victoria's voice came out small and defeated. "I couldn't afford one. My regular attorney won't take my calls after Mr. Thornton froze our joint accounts." Judge Santos's eyebrow rose slightly. "Mr. Thornton?" David stood. "Your Honor, given the evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and the imminent risk of assets being transferred offshore, my client felt it necessary to protect his financial interests. We'll deal with that later, Mrs. Thornton. The court will appoint a public defender to represent you. But for the purposes of this emergency hearing, I'm going to allow you to speak for yourself if you choose. Do you understand your rights?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well. Mr. Chen, present your evidence." What followed was 3 hours of testimony that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life in excruciating detail. David presented the videos Rosa had recorded, playing them on a screen large enough that every wince, every cry, every moment of Sophie's terror was visible to everyone in the courtroom. He called Rosa to testify, and the housekeeper spoke in halting English about what she had witnessed, about her attempts to call Marcus, about her own failure to act sooner because of her fear of deportation. Dr. Mitchell presented her psychological evaluation, describing Sophie's symptoms in clinical terms that somehow made them even more heartbreaking. When I showed her a photograph of Mrs. Thornton, the child's heart rate increased from 72 beats per minute to 145. Her cortisol levels indicate chronic stress exposure. In layman's terms, her body has been in a constant state of fight or flight for an extended period. An officer from the SFPD Fraud Division testified about Richard Blackwood's involvement, about the conspiracy to defraud Marcus of his company, about the evidence they had already gathered showing a pattern of similar schemes targeting other wealthy executives. And finally, David called Marcus himself to testify. "Mr. Thornton," Judge Santos said, "tell me in your own words what happened when you returned from New York." Marcus told her everything. The silence, the fear in his staff's eyes, finding Sophie facing the wall, the videos, the conspiracy, the bruises. He spoke clearly and calmly, but inside he was screaming. Inside he was still that man walking into his house expecting laughter and finding terror instead. When he finished, the judge turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Thornton, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Victoria stood slowly. She looked different now, stripped of her expensive clothes and perfect makeup, wearing a simple dress and no jewelry except her wedding ring. She looked, Marcus thought, like what she actually was, a woman who had made terrible choices and was finally being forced to face the consequences. "Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't have a good excuse. Mr. Chen is right about everything. Richard Blackwood did approach me. He did offer me money to get close to Marcus, and I took it because I was in debt and desperate and stupid. The marriage was fake at first, but then—" She paused, her hands twisting together. "Then I thought maybe it could be real. Maybe I could make it work. Maybe I could learn to love them both." "And the abuse?" Judge Santos's voice was ice. "I didn't plan it. I didn't wake up one day and decide to hurt a child. But she cried so much, and Richard kept pressuring me about the timeline, and I couldn't make her stop, and I snapped, over and over again. And each time I told myself it would be the last time, that I would do better, be better. But I didn't." Victoria looked at Marcus for the first time since entering the courtroom. "I know you'll never forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that I didn't want to become this person. I didn't want to be like my father. But somewhere along the way, that's exactly what I became." The courtroom was silent for a long moment. Then Judge Santos spoke, her voice carrying the weight of 22 years on the family court bench. "Mrs. Thornton, I have presided over approximately 4,000 custody cases. I have seen parents who were neglectful, parents who were addicted, parents who were simply overwhelmed. And I have seen parents who were deliberately cruel. You fall into the last category. The evidence presented today shows a systematic pattern of abuse, terrorization, and psychological torture inflicted upon a child who was completely dependent on you for care and protection. Victoria's shoulders shook with silent sobs. However, the judge continued, I also note that you have shown genuine remorse, that you have cooperated fully, that you have not attempted to shift blame or minimize your actions. This does not excuse what you did, but it does speak to your capacity for self-awareness. Judge Santos looked at the paperwork in front of her, then at Sophie, who sat in a child advocate's lap in the back of the courtroom. In the matter of custody, I am granting sole legal and physical custody of Sophie Thornton to Marcus Thornton, effective immediately. Mrs. Thornton's parental rights are hereby suspended pending criminal proceedings. She is ordered to maintain a distance of no less than 100 yards from the child at all times. Marcus felt the tension drain from his body like water. Sophie was his, legally, officially, completely his. As for visitation, the judge continued, that will be determined at a later date pending the outcome of criminal charges and a psychological evaluation of Mrs. Thornton. I am also ordering family therapy for Sophie and Mr. Thornton to help them both process this trauma. She looked at Victoria one more time. Mrs. Thornton, the district attorney's office will be filing charges against you for child abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and making false statements. I suggest you get a good attorney. You're going to need one. Victoria nodded mutely. As the bailiff led her from the courtroom, she looked back once at where Marcus sat. Not at him, but past him, to where Sophie played with a stuffed animal the child advocate had given her. The look on Victoria's face was something Marcus had never seen before. Genuine grief, real regret, the expression of someone who had finally understood exactly what she had lost. He did not feel sorry for her. 3 weeks later, Victoria Sterling Thornton pleaded guilty to 4 counts of child abuse and 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison, 15 years probation, and mandatory psychiatric treatment. Her parental rights were permanently terminated. Richard Blackwood, facing a federal RICO investigation, tried to flee to the Cayman Islands and was arrested at the airport. The FBI had been building a case against him for years, and Victoria's testimony about their conspiracy gave them the final pieces they needed. He was looking at 30 to 40 years in federal prison. 1 week after the sentencing, an envelope arrived at Marcus's house with a Phoenix postmark. Inside was a letter written in careful handwriting and a child's drawing done in crayon. Dear Mr. Thornton, the letter began. My name is Sarah Hayes. My husband and I are the foster parents of Timothy Hayes, the little boy your ex-wife hurt 3 years ago. We saw the news about her arrest and conviction. We wanted you to know what it meant to our family. Timothy is 6 now. He's been in therapy since the incident, working through trauma that no child should ever have to face. The doctors say he's made remarkable progress, but he still has nightmares. He still flinches at raised voices. He still asks sometimes if the scary lady will come back. When we told him that Mrs. Thornton had been arrested, that she was going to prison, that she would never hurt another child, something shifted in him. For the first time in 3 years, he drew a picture without darkness in it. We've enclosed it. He wanted your daughter to have it. He says it's both of them. He says they're holding hands because they're both free from the scary lady now. He says they're both safe. We can never thank you enough for what you did. By protecting your daughter, by making sure justice was served, you gave our son something he desperately needed. Closure. The knowledge that bad people do face consequences. The understanding that he wasn't at fault, that the adult was. Your courage gave him courage. Your fight gave him peace, and for that, we will be forever grateful. With deepest thanks, Sarah and Michael Hayes. Marcus read the letter 3 times, his vision blurring with tears. He looked at the drawing, 2 stick-figure children, one slightly taller than the other, holding hands beneath a rainbow. Both were smiling. Both had the sun shining above them. In the corner, in a child's unsteady printing, were the words, "We are okay now." He walked upstairs to Sophie's room and tacked the drawing to her wall, right next to the window where the morning light would hit it. She was napping, curled up with the stuffed raccoon, Elena's locket glinting at her throat. Another child. Another victim who had suffered because the adults who should have protected him had failed. But Timothy was healing now, just like Sophie was healing. The scary lady was gone. Justice had been served, and two children who had never met were connected by their survival, by their resilience, by their journey from darkness into light. Marcus touched the drawing gently, then bent to kiss Sophie's forehead. "You're not alone, baby girl," he whispered. "There's another little one out there who understands, who knows what you went through, and he's going to be okay too, just like you." Marcus watched the news coverage from his living room, Sophie playing quietly with her toys nearby. She had started therapy with Dr. Mitchell 3 times a week, and slowly, incrementally, she was beginning to heal. She laughed sometimes now. Real laughs, not the nervous giggles of a child afraid of making too much noise. She asked for things she wanted instead of waiting silently to see what she would be given. She had started calling Marcus Daddy again instead of Daddy Sir. But she still had nightmares, still woke up screaming sometimes, convinced that Victoria was in her room with the cast-iron pan, still flinched at loud noises, still checked the corners of every room they entered as if making sure there was no one hiding there waiting to punish her. Dr. Mitchell said it would take time, that trauma this severe did not heal quickly, that there would be setbacks and bad days and moments when it seemed like no progress was being made at all. But she also said that Sophie had something crucial that many traumatized children lacked. She had a parent who believed her, who protected her, who was willing to do whatever it took to help her feel safe again. Marcus had made changes, big ones. He had stepped down as CEO of TechGuard Solutions, accepting a position as chairman of the board instead, a role that required him to be in the office maybe 2 days a week and let him work from home the rest of the time. He had hired a full-time nanny carefully vetted by both Dr. Mitchell and a private investigator, but only for times when he absolutely could not be with Sophie himself. He had converted his home office into a playroom, moving his work laptop to the kitchen counter where he could keep one eye on Sophie at all times. The company had survived Richard's attempted coup. The board had rallied around Marcus once they learned the truth, and the merger deal that Richard had been pushing had been dissolved. TechGuard was still his, still successful, still valuable, but it no longer felt like the most important thing in Marcus's world. That place now belonged exclusively to the little girl who was building a tower out of blocks on the carpet. 6 months after the emergency custody hearing, Marcus loaded Sophie into the car and drove to Half Moon Bay. It was a Saturday in late spring, the kind of perfect California day that tourists paid thousands of dollars to experience. The sky was cloudless blue, the ocean sparkled like someone had scattered diamonds across its surface, and the beach stretched out in a curve of golden sand. Sophie ran ahead of him the moment they got out of the car, her small feet kicking up sand, her laughter carrying on the salt breeze. She wore a yellow sundress, her favorite color now, and her hair had grown back in the spots where it had been pulled out. She looked, Marcus thought, like a child discovering what normal felt like. Happy and carefree and completely unaware that just months ago her world had been so dark. The trauma was still there, living in her nightmares and her startled reactions to loud sounds. But so was this joy, this freedom, this growing into herself at her own pace. She stopped at the water's edge, dancing back when a wave rolled in, squealing with delight when the cold water touched her toes. Marcus stood watching her, his heart so full it physically hurt. Rosa had come with them, carrying a picnic basket and a blanket. She spread the blanket on the sand and unpacked sandwiches and juice boxes and sliced fruit. Sophie ran back from the water, chattering about a shell she had found, and threw herself down on the blanket to examine her treasure. "It's magic," she announced solemnly. "If you hold it to your ear, you can hear the ocean talking." Marcus held the shell to his ear, making a show of listening carefully. "What's it saying?" "It says I'm a good swimmer and I should go in the water more." "Does it now? Well, maybe we should bring you here every weekend then." Sophie's face lit up with joy so pure and uncomplicated that Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. This This was what childhood should look like. This was what he had almost lost forever. After lunch, Sophie built a sandcastle, elaborate and sprawling, with towers and walls and a moat that filled with seawater. She worked with intense concentration, narrating a story about a princess who lived there with her dragon and didn't need any knights to rescue her because she could rescue herself. A wave larger than the others rolled in and knocked down one of the walls. Marcus tensed, waiting for tears, for frustration, for the disproportionate upset that had characterized Sophie's early weeks of recovery. But instead she laughed, actually laughed at the destruction. "The ocean is playing with me," she said, and immediately began rebuilding. Marcus looked at Rosa, saw the wetness on her cheeks, knew his own face showed the same emotion. This was healing. This was what progress looked like. Not perfect, not complete, but moving in the right direction. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Sophie found a starfish in a tidal pool. She picked it up carefully, cradling it in her small hands, her face full of wonder. "Daddy, look! Can we keep it?" Marcus knelt beside her. "Let's take a picture of you holding it. Then we should put it back in the ocean so it can be free." "Free like me?" The question hit Marcus like a freight train. He looked at his daughter, this resilient, brave, beautiful little girl who had survived something that would have broken most adults. "Yes, baby, like you." Sophie carefully placed the starfish back in the tidal pool and watched it settle among the rocks. Then she turned to Marcus and threw her arms around his neck, holding on tight. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Pumpkin, more than anything in the whole world." As they packed up to leave, Rosa approached Marcus with an expression he could not quite read. "Mr. Thornton, there is something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Marcus felt a flicker of alarm. "What is it?" Rosa's hands twisted together, and Marcus recognized the gesture from that first terrible day when she had tried to warn him. "The night Miss Elena died before the stroke, when she was still awake in the hospital bed, she made me promise something." Marcus's throat tightened. Elena. God. It felt like a lifetime ago and yesterday all at once. "She knew she might not make it," Rosa continued, her voice soft. "The doctors had told her about the risks of the surgery they wanted to try. And she held my hand and she said, 'Rosa, if anything happens to me, promise you will watch over Sophie. Promise you will protect her from anyone who tries to hurt her. Even if it's someone Marcus trusts.'" The world seemed to tilt slightly. "Even if it's someone I trust?" She said those exact words like she knew, like she could see what might happen if you married the wrong person. Marcus thought about the locket around Sophie's neck, about Elena's last words to him, about the way Rosa had installed that hidden camera and gathered evidence and risked everything to protect a child who was not even her own. And he understood that Elena, even in her final hours, even facing death, had been trying to protect their daughter. "For 8 weeks I failed her," Rosa said, tears streaming down her face now. "I let Mrs. Victoria hurt our Sophie. I was too afraid of losing my job, of being deported. I failed Miss Elena's promise." "But you kept it in the end," Marcus said, gripping her shoulders gently. "You're the reason I found out. You're the reason Sophie is safe now. You didn't fail, Rosa. You saved her." Rosa looked at him with eyes full of pain and relief and something like absolution. "I made a promise to your wife, and Mexican women, we don't break promises to the dead." Sophie ran back from the car where she had been watching hermit crabs, oblivious to the emotional conversation happening between the adults. "Rosa! Daddy! Come see! There's a crab wearing a shell like a house!" They walked together to admire the hermit crab, this odd little family they had become. A widowed father learning to put his daughter first, a housekeeper who had become a grandmother in all but name, and a little girl who was slowly, bravely learning to trust the world again. As they drove home in the fading light, Sophie fell asleep in her car seat, her head lolling to the side, one hand still clutching the locket around her neck. Marcus looked at her in the rearview mirror and felt something settle in his chest. Not quite peace, but close to it, something like hope. The house, when they arrived, looked different than it had 6 months ago. Marcus had made changes here too. Sophie's room was painted yellow now, filled with toys and books and everything a child could want. The formal living room where he had found her facing the wall had been converted into a playroom. The white sofas donated to charity, replaced by comfortable furniture that a child could actually use. The cast-iron skillets had all been thrown away. But more than the physical changes, the house felt different. It felt lighter, safer, like a place where laughter could exist without being punished, like a home instead of a stage set for other people's cruelty. Rosa carried the sleeping Sophie inside and up to her room. Marcus followed, watching as the housekeeper gently changed Sophie into pajamas without waking her, laid her down in bed, pulled the covers up to her chin. He thought about all the nights Rosa had done this over the past 6 months, all the times she had been there when Sophie woke up screaming, all the patience and love and care she had poured into a child who was not her blood but had become her family anyway. "Thank you," he said as they stood in the doorway, looking back at Sophie's sleeping form. "For everything. For keeping Elena's promise, for protecting Sophie when I couldn't, for staying even when it was dangerous." Rosa smiled, and it transformed her worn face into something beautiful. "She is a good girl, our Sophie. She deserves a good life. She has one now. We'll make sure of it." They left the door open a crack the way Sophie liked it and went downstairs. Rosa made tea and they sat in the kitchen talking quietly about nothing in particular, about the garden that needed weeding, about the new school Sophie would start in the fall, about the puppy they were thinking about getting, a golden retriever Sophie wanted to name Hope. Normal things, safe things, the kind of conversation that happened in functional homes between people who cared about each other. At midnight, Rosa went to her quarters and Marcus did one final check of the house. Locked doors, set alarm, turned off lights. Routine tasks that felt different now. Before, he had done these things mindlessly, focused on whatever business problem was occupying his thoughts. Now, each locked door represented protection. Each activated alarm meant safety. Each dark room meant no one was hiding there, waiting to hurt his daughter. He stopped in Sophie's doorway one last time before going to bed himself. She had shifted in her sleep, one arm thrown over her head, her face peaceful in the silver glow of her moon nightlight. The locket glinted at her throat, catching the light. Marcus thought about promises, the ones he had made to Elena and broken, the ones he had made to Sophie and was learning to keep, the ones Rosa had made and honored at great personal risk. He thought about how fragile trust was, how easy to break and how hard to rebuild. How his daughter, despite everything, still trusted him, still believed him when he said he would protect her, still looked at him with love instead of fear. That trust was the most precious thing he had ever been given, more valuable than his company, his wealth, his reputation, more important than anything else in his life, and he would spend every day he had left, proving that it was not misplaced. "Sleep well, baby girl," he whispered into the quiet room. "Daddy's right down the hall. Daddy's not going anywhere, not ever again." The house settled into the peaceful silence of night, not the terrible silence of that first day, heavy with secrets and fear, but the good silence of safety, of a child sleeping without nightmares, of a home where healing was possible. And in that silence, Marcus Thornton made one final promise, not out loud this time, but deep in his heart where promises were kept or broken. "I will be the father she deserves. I will put her first, always, no matter what. This is my second chance, and I will not waste it." The moon rose higher, casting its silver light through the windows, illuminating a house that had been a prison and was slowly becoming a home again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, therapy appointments and legal paperwork and the slow, difficult work of healing. But tonight there was just this. A father and daughter under the same roof, both safe, both loved, both learning to trust again. And that, Marcus thought as he finally went to his own room, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Outside, the California night stretched endless and star-filled. Inside, two hearts beat in harmony, one large and guilty and determined, One small and wounded and brave, both of them healing, both of them home.